expressed themselves enthusiastically. So what is going on? Has it all gone off the rails here? George Galloway joins us from our studio in London. Respect MP for Bradford West. Ian Blackford is also on the line, former treasurer for the Scottish National Party in Skye. George Galloway, has it got unpleasant?
It's very ugly, and the false dichotomy that Alex Salmond himself drew by declaring his side to be Team Scotland is a very clear one. If you're not on Team Scotland, you're against Scotland. That's a matter of simple logic. Or worse, you're on Team England. It's a false dichotomy. It's an ugly dichotomy. And it has been the intellectual underpinning of some of the ugliness. Jim Sillars, the day before Alex Salmond was out campaigning with him, the next day said there would be a day of reckoning for those of us who had the temerity to oppose them, to not be on their fake Team Scotland. A day of reckoning is a very, very ugly phrase. And he singled out, named even, companies, shops that were to be boycotted. John Lewis, for goodness sake, a model of social partnership. Banks, oil companies that would feel the full weight of nationalisation.
Let me bring in Ian Blackford on that. Ian, does that sound like that's the kind of thing that shouldn't be said?
I think it sounds like George is rattled. I mean, I think you said at the top of the programme, Jeremy, that you can't describe how exciting this independence debate is, and I think that's the reality. I mean, we've been having a fantastic conversation across the country over the course of the last couple of years, and many people have joined in that. It's a wonderful atmosphere. I think most people on both sides have behaved impeccably over the course of the last while. I certainly agree with Alistair that whatever the result of the vote on Thursday, that it's important that the country moves together, that we pull together, that there's a degree of humility and respect for both sides. I don't get that from what we're getting from George here.
If you have a separate news service in Scotland, which you may well have, will we see the same kind of thing where somebody who reports something that the nationalists don't like gets his head is called for, he gets a protest, all that kind of thing? Is it going to be like that?
Well, I mean, the Yes campaign hasn't engaged in that, Jeremy. I think we've actually had a very civilised debate. I think we've got a full degree of respect for the BBC and the other media organisations.
You're protesting outside it on Sunday.
Yes, but people were entitled to protest in a friendly manner. I mean, I think what you've got to look at is that this has been a very friendly debate over the course of the last 2 years. There's been no violence in this campaign. It's been entirely peaceful. And actually, George, I don't think you do yourself any credit by trying to talk this up as very ugly and all.
Alex Salmond called for the sacking of the BBC's political editor. There were thousands of people, flags waving, in a very stirring show of nationalist fervour outside the BBC as they laid siege to it. The police had to keep them out. You call that a conversation?
George always uses very rowdy language. Let me just say, because I think this is important.
I wasn't finished my point. You call it a conversation. Other people call it a shirking. Other people call it intimidation. We had 1,000 people in the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow last night who had to run a gauntlet of people screaming and spitting in their faces.
Is it all one way, Ian?
We've got to film.
No, it's not. And I really think we're doing the whole debate a disservice by the kind of thing that George is saying. I mean, I've had things on Twitter. I've had unpleasant things said. We all live in the real world, the harsh world of politics. I think what we all have to do in the political tent is that we've got to make sure that people do behave in a responsible manner. But let's come back to this point about the BBC, because it's important. Last week, we woke up last Wednesday morning to hear the stories that Royal Bank of Scotland would be moving their registered office to London, that head offices would be moving to London, that jobs would be lost. That was the message that was put out. It was a message that was orchestrated by Cameron, by the Treasury, and I think that's what people took offence at. They don't take offence at the individual people that work with the BBC, but there's been a distortion of the news which has happened over the course of the last week.
George Galloway, there is an upside to this, isn't there, which is that people are engaged. 97% voter registration. People are so engaged with this. It is just extraordinary. There hasn't been anything like it.
Well, of course, the stakes are so high. Everyone will have to get engaged. Everyone in the country will have to get out and vote. And I'm sitting here in your studio with an expat Scot like myself who doesn't have a vote. And we're pretty cheesed off.
Come and live in Scotland and you can have a vote, George.
I'll tell
you what, join us in creating a new Scotland. Why not come back and help in that process? Then you can have a vote.
We're as Scottish as you are.
And I don't deny
our country is being threatened with being torn apart. And I think that is something on which we ought to have had a say. There's 900,000 of us.
You talk about very ugly, but that's the language you're using, torn apart. We're talking about taking responsibility. We're talking about people in Scotland having the right to elect the government they want, not one that's foisted upon them. The language you're using is highly inappropriate for the debate.
Well, I've got a government now that was foisted upon me that I didn't vote for.
George, why are you...
3/4 of the people in Scotland have got a government at Holyrood that they didn't vote for.
Well, I was trying to work out
foisted upon
from
them.
a distance, George Galloway, why you are a no, because I would have assumed you would want Scotland to be governed by a government more to the left of England.
Well, it wouldn't be more to the left, and even if it wanted to be, it wouldn't be able to afford to be. The economic and financial landslide that will occur on Thursday after the vote, if it goes the wrong way, would preclude any kind of left-wing progressive policies. It takes money to buy mince. If you don't have money, you can't have public services.
Okay.
You can't have Texan levels of taxation and Scandinavian levels of social democracy.
Thank you very much, George Galloway, Respect MP for Bradford West, and Ian Blackford, former treasurer for the Scottish National Party, who's in Skye, beautiful Skye. So let's just press on with this for a moment and look at another angle here, because there is a front page I wanted to discuss.